Okay, folks, welcome to the latest installment of my review of The Future, a book by Stefan Molyneux. He is a anarcho-capitalist podcaster who promotes philosophy, non-aggressive parenting, stateless societies, and hard-boiled scientific empiricism. That is my definition for him, because if you look at Wikipedia, you're just going to find a hit piece. Here is how to find Stefan Molyneux online. He has the website freedomain.com. He's also on Rumble and BitChute, and you can pay $5 a month at freedomain.locals to get access to his entire library, which includes one of his latest books, The Future, a novel of science fiction, which is supposed to be his equivalent to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, in which she delivered her philosophy of objectivism to the world through this fictional narrative, and The Future is his fictional narrative delivering his philosophy to the world. Now, a recap of the book up through chapter 11. 90% of humanity has perished in a 4 centuries long war that ended when automated drones put an end to WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. The survivors have since created a near-utopian society, commonly called the Civ, made possible by peaceful parenting, in which parents raise kids without aggression, meaning yelling, spanking, timeouts, etc. 2 girls raised in this near-utopia are verbally and physically abused by 2 boys living in a survivalist tribe outside the Civ. One of the girls, Alice, sneaks back to the site of her abuse and finds the tribe. She contacts her parents right before the tribe captures her. So now we are going to be in chapter 12, in which we have finally a confrontation between the leader of the Civ and or at least one of the organizations governing the Civ, and the leader of the survivalist society. So chapter 12, Alice's father, David, riding as a passenger in a surveillance jet, is taken to where the tribe has been spotted. With the might of the Civ at his back, and they are a mighty civilization, they have quite sophisticated weaponry and future tech in that regard. The survivalist society is really no match for them at all. David departs the jet alone and unarmed and meets with the tribe. Alice, his daughter, is returned to him by the tribe's leader, Roman. With Alice still present, David and Roman enter into negotiations. So now we're going to get Roman's perspective on things. Roman knows that David's ultimate objective is to incorporate the tribe, or at least the tribe's children, into the Civ. But he counters by expounding upon his belief that all civilizations inevitably collapse and return to living as survivalists. The tribe has simply skipped ahead to adopting the inevitable, inescapable post-Civ way of life. So David, what he wants is to take the children of the survivalist tribe and raise them as peacefully as they can, so that the effects of the bad parenting that they've already received at the hands of the survivalists can hopefully be mitigated and undone, so that they can become productive members of the Civ for their own good. But Roman says, your civilization, like every other civilization that has come before you, is going to collapse, and you're going to end up like us. So why should we go through this BS where we try to adopt your way of life when you're eventually going to return to our way of life? Roman is himself named for the fall of the Roman Empire, which precipitated the Dark Ages. Their way of life, including their parenting, prepares children for more Dark Ages. And this is one of Roman's main arguments. He sees the parenting style of the Civ as leaving its children unprepared for the horror of the Civ's inevitable collapse into ruin. The Civ is like this wonderland where very rarely does anything bad ever happen to you. Nature has been so tamed that there are no natural consequences to anything that you do. And so when Roman sees them parenting their kids in this, pain-free environment, he's looking at them and saying, when civilization collapses and you're going to be ejected out into the rest of the world, which doesn't have all of these technological accompaniments that make your life bearable, you're going to be in for a world of hell, the likes of which you've never seen. And your children are going to suffer from that. So He's looking at his style of parenting, which involves punishments and consequences, as reflecting nature, which has its own punishments and consequences. Now, Roman disagrees with the concept of moral universals, arguing instead that human beings, like any other animals, are biologically hardwired to put themselves, their families, and their tribes first. So he rejects the civ's ethic of universally preferable behavior. Roman argues that humans must be trained by necessary suffering, which means suffering necessary to procure one's livelihood, in order to be truly human. Consequently, the Civ, which supplies most basic needs via technology and automation, not only strips humans of their ability to function in the natural world, but also strips them of their humanity. So the Civ is kind of producing these not really human humans. Noting that if Alice had suspected the tribe was hiding on the mountain, she could have simply advised the Civ to look more closely there rather than sneaking back herself, Roman suggests Alice's true motive in returning was a natural female biological attraction to his son's aggression and to the tribe's way of life, his son being the one who actually attacked her. And what Roman is saying here is that humans are biologically hardwired for a particular style of life, really the survivalist style of life. And even David's own daughter is evidencing this biological attraction to the normal way of human life, which is the survivalist way. Roman criticizes peaceful parenting, arguing it relegates the parent to big buddy status because the parent is incapable of delivering consequences for the child's misbehavior. But the natural world is full of consequences for misbehavior. There are so many things that can kill you out in the natural world if you're not careful. And what parents basically do by disciplining their children or punishing them when they misbehave is they're trying to basically reflect the natural world back to these children in a way that's not going to kill them, because the natural world doesn't care whether they live or die. Roman maintains, moreover, that human beings evolved intelligence only because they often suffered and died from the consequences of their ignorance, stupidity, and short-sightedness. By ensuring comfort and refusing to levy consequences when needed, societies like the Civ frustrate human evolution and even cause humans to regress. So the natural give and take between humanity and nature is thwarted by all of this technological luxury. And so children, rather than growing up in a world where they understand that they have to be careful with nature, instead they have this feeling of absolute safety that is going to keep them from developing the skills that they really would need to survive out in nature, which is where they are inevitably headed. Remember all the time that Roman's idea is that the Civ will fall, and one day all those people in the Civ who were relying on technology are going to have to start relying on themselves, and they are not being equipped to do that. Excuse me. In Roman's eyes, the natural world is one of predator and prey, and if children are to survive in such a harsh world, parents must teach children to avoid becoming prey by modeling predation to them. In other words, it's better that a parent deliver punishment, discipline, consequences, etc., than have nature do it, because nature doesn't care if the children live or die. Better the harsh word of or slap of a parent than the growl or teeth of a bear. Now, David, on the other hand, poses this challenge to Roman's point of view. Since Roman's primary concern is his tribe's survival, David puts forward the proposition that the Civ is actually a society that will not eventually collapse into ruin. So he is attacking the fundamental belief that Roman is presenting here, which is that all civilizations eventually collapse. David is saying that the Civ is a civilization that will not collapse. According to David, the reason prior societies kept collapsing is that their parenting style was child abuse. Since the Civ practices peaceful parenting, it won't collapse. So it is actually everything in David's mind starts with the child and the formation of the child into the adult. If the child can be parented correctly, then the child will become a functioning member of a good society that will last. The Civ raises children to develop empathy, and through empathy to universalize their preferences onto others, so that they treat people as they would wish to be treated. Hence, the ethic of the Civ is called universally preferable behavior. So, in the ability to understand other people's feelings and to empathize with those feelings means that you want people to feel as good as you feel, and you don't want people to feel bad for your sake. So, in engaging in transactions, like for example, with empathy means you want every transaction to be win-win. You want to be pleased by the outcome of the transaction, and you want the other person with whom you are transacting to be pleased, as opposed to one in which someone dominates the other and someone has to lose, because you don't want the other person to feel bad. Prior societies, on the other hand, raised children via rewards and punishments, but that only taught children to respond to whomever had the most power to reward and or punish them. If you remove the governing authorities, people raised in such a fashion will revert to dog-eat-dog selfishness, not having the internal compass of empathy to guide their behavior and cause them to treat others as they would themselves. See, the parenting that happens with a reward and punishment structure, that only has the child focus on his or her own feelings. Do I feel good, and who has the capacity to make me feel good? Do I feel bad? Who has the capacity to make me feel bad? And that child will respond to whoever holds power over him or her. So that's, once you remove the power structures, then it's just everybody out for themselves. And so it takes empathy to really create the civilization of the Civ, whereas the only thing you could get is a self-defeating civilization if you populate it with people whose only real care is for how good or bad do I feel at any given time. The old parenting style was also self-contradictory. By punishing their children, parents exhibited the very harm-inflicting behavior they wanted their kids to avoid emulating. It's like basically spanking for there were parents who would spank children for hitting other children. Like, well, is hitting wrong or not? That is the universal principle. It's like, if hitting is not right, then it's not right for the parents to do it either. It's not right for the children to do it. It's not right for the parents either. The whole universally preferable behavior focuses on the idea of treating all people relatively the same. Because treating children differently from adults violates that principle of universality. In other words, you can't divide people into artificial categories like adults and children that you then treat differently or apply different sets of rules to. Now, capability-based differential treatment is okay. After all, if we had like an adult who had the learning capacity of a 10-year-old, then we wouldn't try to treat that adult as if he was a fully mentally capable adult. We'd treat him like a 10-year-old. And likewise, if a child has the kind of development to act in an adult fashion, then that child is accepted as an adult in most cases. So the idea of dividing people into these artificial categories of adults and children is not unknown to the Civ, because they do understand that adults, the parents, are the caretakers of the children, and the children are generally under the guidance and protection of the adults. But the same rules that apply to children apply also to adults. If children aren't supposed to hit, then adults aren't supposed to hit. If children aren't supposed to yell, then adults aren't supposed to yell. And basically, if you're not supposed to treat an adult in a crappy fashion, you're not supposed to treat your kid in a crappy fashion. So it's all a universal principle. Now, in David's eyes, Romans using the harshness of the natural world as a reason to be harsh to children is a baseless justification, since mankind can alleviate the natural world's harshness through technology. There's no longer cause to be harsh to children, assuming there ever really was. So Romans' argument is that since there's going to be this return to nature, you have to treat children in accordance with the harshness of nature. But David is arguing that the Civ is a self-sustaining civilization that will not crumble over time, and therefore you can legitimately raise children in this much more harmless world so that they can develop more freely and explore the world with confidence as opposed to concern. By refusing to live in the Civ, Roman's tribe is actually choosing to subject their children to the harshness of nature. and consequently they are choosing to harshly parent their children, not because it's necessary, but because they have been ideologically convinced that no civilization can endure, even though the Civ has endured and shows no signs of the decay or rot that historically indicates a failing civilization. In David's estimation, the Civ will endure because it breeds superior human beings. And this is kind of a long passage from David, but it's important to get it all. Learning empathy requires a specific sequence of eye contact, skin contact, emotional mirroring to wire up the different parts of the brain necessary to develop mirror neurons, or the capacity for compassion. In order to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, your brain must be able to process the emotional reality that other people are like you. That empathy is a basic biological function that, as I said, requires specific parenting techniques and intimacy. Yelling at children to be compassionate, hitting them for selfishness, beating them for violence, that only produces violent, selfish children who lack compassion. You are out here breeding criminals and brutalizers, while we use our peace and plenty to raise civilized human beings. I was raised in love and peace and reason and wealth. I have mirror neurons. You have a void where your conscience should be. So, before we get on to the next portion, understand, David is basically saying that human beings who are raised the peaceful way will develop into a better, qualitatively better, biologically better breed of human being. We're essentially talking about, well, I guess you could say, eugenics through parenting styles. Mileage may vary on that. So a deal is struck. Knowing that he's outgunned, because I don't feel like Roman is actually convinced by any of David's arguments, Roman offers to let David give him a tour of the Civ. If Roman comes to believe the Civ will last, then his people will integrate with it. And David agrees to this proposal. So, now we have the central conflict of the book being, will Roman accept the Civ's self-sustaining property? Will he be convinced by the kind of society that he sees that David is right and he's wrong, and his tribe should fold itself into the Civ? This is the conflict of the book? I don't know about this, because this just seems a little bit on the boring side. Before this chapter started, what promised to be a tense situation quickly turned into a long-winded campfire chat, resulting in an invitation to tour Fantasyland, essentially. And I'm not kidding when I say it was long-winded. Roman goes on and on and on philosophizing, and David's rebuttal is just as lengthy. It's disturbing, because these are the kinds of things that actually happened in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. There were times when there would be conversations in which you had characters espousing their philosophical views and asking each other questions and probing at each other to try and figure out, where do they have common ground or where do they disagree. But that was forgivable because that usually took place as the culmination of conflict. We already had plenty of narrative behind us to get us to know the characters in and of themselves, and so that when they interacted and were able to discuss things and hash things out, we could be more in tune because we already cared about the characters from a narrative point of view. We have not had nearly enough narrative in the future to justify this. Having to leave aside some of the early chapters which don't really connect in with the main narrative of the book, we've only had one real thing happen, which was Alice and her friend Emily went to the mountain. They got beat up by a couple of boys there, and now there is this confrontation, and that's really not a whole lot of story to justify having this long-winded philosophical conversation that ends up in something so banal as, why don't you come over to my house and take a look around? I'm not really I'm intrigued by the possibilities, but I'm not excited by the possibilities. And here's another thing that really bothered me about the book is that Alice, or this chapter especially, Alice, who was for so long the primary protagonist of the book, we've been following her all the way up through this portion, except for the point at which David was making discussions with the Civ about how are we going to handle the fact that my daughter was attacked. All this time, for the longest time, with the exception of that one conversation, Alice has been the protagonist, and now she's practically gone. She doesn't participate in this conversation at all, except to protest when Roman accuses her of actually wanting to join their society. And you have to wonder whether Roman is actually right or wrong about that. We don't actually know. We don't actually know whether Alice subconsciously does want to join the tribe, or at least spend some time with the tribe to find out what is the deal with them. So we haven't gotten any indication of that from her motivations as she's explained them to herself, but characters can be enormously self-deceptive. And so maybe Roman's onto something, but we are not going to find out here. And we don't know if we're ever going to find out at this point because nothing of that gets addressed. All of a sudden, it becomes a contest between David and Roman, and Alice, well, she was an early casualty of, encountering the survivalists earlier in the book, and now she can be set aside. Yeah, I didn't care for that fact that she's basically no longer a person of importance, at least as far as this portion of the book goes. Now, the survivalists hold zero tactical advantage over the Civ, so what are the actual stakes here? I mean, heads, they give up their way of life willingly. Tails, the Civ converts them by the sword? We don't know what the actual options are here, and the survivalists are so technologically outmatched that the reader is tempted to root for the survivalists instead of the Civ. Remember, the survivalists are the ones who are actually kind of more like us. Just if you even just want to compare the styles under which we were parented. So if you have, if we have more in common with the survivalists than we do with the Civ, in that we weren't even raised the same way, and now you've got the Civ coming in and basically colonizing the tribe, who is actually supposed to get our sympathy? I mean, man generally roots for the underdog, and here the underdog is the survivalists. So, who are we supposed to be rooting for? Who's the real protagonist? Which side is the good guys? We don't actually know that at this point in the book. And I've read books before where it turns out the good guys were the bad guys and the bad guys were the good guys. So it wouldn't be a surprise to me if this were to flip. Now, of course, I understand Molyneux's teaching, and I know what he's trying to get across, so I know who he thinks are the good guys and the bad guys, but it could be something that's actually up in the air to the reader at this point. Moreover, Roman's capitulation gives the impression that he's looking for a way out of the survivalist lifestyle, and in fact wants the tribe to join the Civ, but he just needs, like, a false because to convince the tribe. He ends up sounding tired and not formidable. I mean, this doesn't feel like it's going to be much of a conflict of wills because all of a sudden Roman's already saying, all right, okay, fine. And Roman actually makes the proposal himself to go and tour the Civ, to go and see whether this civilization. Now, if David had suggested it and Roman had agreed, that would be one thing. But it feels, if I'm remembering this correctly from the chapter, Roman is the one who actually proposed, well, why don't I go take a look at the Civ, and if you're right, then we'll fold into the Civ. And it's like, huh? You're just giving up. I mean, that doesn't sound like a staunch enemy or even somebody who staunchly believes in what it is that he has been putting forward all this time. If you think a tour of the place is all that it's going to take, yeah, I don't know. So I'm not really impressed by where the book is necessarily going, and I guess part of that is also because I've read some books like this before. For example, there's a book called, I think it's The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells, in which you have somebody who's kind of waking up from a long sleep and then finding out what the future is like. And there's another one that's a lot more um, it's a lot more relevant to this book, called Looking Backward from the 20th Century by Edward Bellamy, who is in fact the cousin of the preacher who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, the original Pledge of Allegiance for the United States. Edward Bellamy was a socialist, and he told the tale of a man who kind of went to sleep and then woke up and found out that he was, 100 or so years in the future, and the world had turned into a socialist paradise. And so he's being given a tour of this new socialist utopia and finding out various things about it. And so it strikes me that this book, The Future, is turning into that looking backward book, and is preparing to take us on the same kind of tour through the Civ and say, well, here's how this works, here's how this works, here's how this works. Don't we have just a lovely and better society? And don't you now believe that we should be like this? It's a total propaganda book, which is fine. I don't mind propaganda books. Atlas Shrugged was a propaganda book, and it's excellent. But this book is falling short of excellent. And in the next few chapters, we may see it fall further still. So we're at a crossroads here. Now it's a matter of, can David convince Roman that the Civ is actually a good place to live in and is something that he can entrust his tribe to? And that's what will be covered in future chapters of The Future. Thank you for listening. I'm Mike Partika, and I hope you will subscribe so that you can be notified of later updates to this playlist on The Future. And I've got one coming out right around the corner. Might actually publish it immediately after this one, because, oh boy, it didn't take too long to do a review on the next few chapters. Please do subscribe if you get a chance, and I will talk to you later.